Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Marshall W. Allworth Planetarium. My name is Eric Norland, and I'm a member of the Arrowhead Astronomical Society. And this evening, we are privileged to be able to give a presentation, and mine will be on Apollo 11. And I know some of you remember 54 years ago when that tremendous event occurred. We know and understand much about astronomy and about the cosmos, but we really have not ventured far into it. And humans are extraordinary explorers. Out of Africa, humans moved 4 million to 150,000 years ago and populated the whole planet. They did it all on foot. They didn't have machines. They might have had some rafts or boats, but pretty much moved around generation after generation to explore the planet. And they took advantage of nature. And when the ice built up on North America, they used the Bering Land Bridge to cross from Asia into Alaska into North America. Humans even migrated out of Europe, and there's some evidence that they came across the ice to North America. And the evidence is the Clovis spear point. And these spear points have been found in Europe and in Oregon and in New Mexico and other regions of North America. And they're very distinct. They have certain patterns of craftsmanship. And it is hypothesized by some that they led to the extinction of the woolly mammoth. However, 13,000 years ago, when the Clovis culture vanished, and so did the mammoths, there is some evidence that a comet might have hit North America and caused global havoc. It wiped out the giant wolf, the giant beaver, giant ground sloth, the mammoth, and many other creatures. But humans are amazing at populating areas of the world. And the Polynesians used rafts and boats to cross the South Pacific and find Hawaii and populate it. And they used the stars to navigate. And Leif Erikson crossed North America, the North Atlantic, and set up a habitat in the New Vinland area of the Atlantic coastline in North America. Marco Polo crossed from Italy to Beijing and brought back stories of adventure, and then went from Singapore back to Italy on a boat. And the Chinese were ingenious in building large ships to cross the Pacific and explore some of California. Little is known about this, but they're starting to unravel some of the mystery. And Columbus got a rather notorious reputation for what he did to the Native American people, who were very docile and laid back. And Columbus was thinking he had discovered Japan or Zipangu, and he wanted gold, and tended to kind of think about gold more than the culture that he had found. But he was amazing in his ingenuity, using these crafts to cross the Atlantic, small ships, but seaworthy and capable of doing the deed. Around 1850, a book came out, From the Earth to the Moon, by Jules Verne, and it inspired many people to think about going to the moon. But the real inspiration came in 1961 when John F. Kennedy, our president then, spoke before Congress and said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." And after his assassination, there was real public awareness to go to the moon and fulfill his wish by the end of the decade. Thus, the Apollo series was born. And on July 16th, 1969, the Apollo 11 rocket lifted off. It was piloted by these three men. On the left, Neil Armstrong; in the center, Michael Collins; on the right, Buzz Aldrin, or Edwin Aldrin. Neil Armstrong graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in mechanical engineering and went on to get a PhD in aeronautical engineering. Michael Collins had a BS degree in military science. And Buzz Aldrin had a BS degree in aeronautical engineering, and then he got a PhD in orbital mechanics. So they were all bright men, good test pilots too. In the middle here is Jim Lovell, who would pilot Apollo 13, but he was at mission control the day of the launch, and then Edwin or Gene Cernan on the left. So the crew got up early, had breakfast, and started getting into the spacecraft. And it's quite a task. They had the engineering crew all backed up to support them. And the fellow with the binoculars was instrumental in creating the Apollo series. And his name is Wernher von Braun. Ironically, he was our enemy in 1945. He was a German officer and was making a V2 rocket. But after the war, he came over to the US as a captive, but was really bright and amazing to create the Saturn V. Here is the Saturn V rocket, and it used 3 stages: the bottom stage, middle, and the third. And then the up here is where the lunar lander is sitting, and this is the service module. Here's the small little command module and an escape tower up on top. Here's an inside view of the Saturn V. It had 5 J1 rocket engines. Each rocket was 12 feet in diameter and 19 feet tall. Each rocket generated 1.5 million pounds of thrust. These are the fuel tanks. This is the kerosene tank. This is the liquid oxygen tank. Total thrust was 7.5 million pounds of thrust. And here is the second stage, about 200,000 pounds of thrust. And again, here's the liquid oxygen. No, here's the fuel, which on this one, fuel was kerosene. On this one, it's hydrogen and liquid oxygen. And then the third stage used a liquid oxygen engine. Oops, wrong button. Okay. So the Saturn V rocket was 300 feet tall, actually 343, and about 22 feet wide. It was the equivalent weight of a battleship and equal to 400 elephants, about 160 tons. So it shook the earth when it lifted off, and there was 200,000 gallons of kerosene, 300,000 gallons of liquid oxygen. And they had to pour water out into this area to keep it cool, otherwise the concrete would fracture. 600 million people watched that liftoff, that whole mission, and they came out in throngs to watch the lifting of Saturn V. Even dignitaries showed up, like former President Lyndon Baines Johnson in the middle with his wife, Lady Bird Johnson, on the left, and Spiro Agnew on the right. It was a great camping experience for many people to watch that liftoff. And the rocket, the lower stage, lasted for about 2.5 minutes, but it lifted the spacecraft up to 40 miles up. And then there was the separation, and the second stage ignited, which brought the spacecraft up to about 71 miles. And then the third stage took it up to 200 miles. And it would start to be going about 24,000 miles per hour. And then they could see the Earth as a whole unit. And the moon laid ahead, 3 days mission journey time to get there. And you can see the Sea of Tranquility is right here. And that's where Tranquility Base landing will be. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter about 10 years ago took these images. You can still see some of the debris left behind from Apollo 11 right there. This is the lunar module instrument panel, some gyros, and able to tell about the attitude of the lunar lander. And during the landing process, one of these switches got damaged. And it was a switch that would ignite the ascent rocket when they were ready to leave. So they had to figure out what to do, and that's where Buzz Aldrin really became helpful. Now, as the spacecraft approached the moon and was getting, within 10 miles of the surface, some alarms went off, and they were saying that the computer was overloaded. It couldn't take it. The computer weighed 70 pounds, but it was barely as smart as your smartphone. But it was essential in guiding the lunar lander. And that was on July the 20th, 1969, when they were on their final approach. Now, the lunar lander weighed 33,000 pounds, and the rocket on the bottom generated 3,500 pounds of thrust. And it was 22 feet tall. And the thickness of the sheet metal up here was equal to 3 aluminum foils. Very thin, very lightweight. As they approached the lunar surface, the alarms kept going off, and Neil Armstrong took command of the spacecraft. It has little rockets right up here and up here, over here and over here, that help stabilize the craft. And by going manual, you can control that. And he chose this spot because it was close to a crater, and he thought that would have some scientific value to be able to go into the crater and explore. And again, here you can see a shadow left from the descent stage left on the moon. As they landed on Tranquility Base, Neil Armstrong said, "Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed." And Houston Command said, "You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. Thanks a lot." And they cheered. They were really happy. It was an amazing feat. So they were on the lunar surface, but really had no idea what the lunar soil might be like. And they had some research, but this was the first time. So Neil Armstrong was first out of the cabin. And just let me say, when they landed, they were supposed to go to sleep for 7 hours, but Neil and Buzz were so excited. They said, we just want to go now. We can't sleep. So mission control let them do that. And the step on the last step is 3.5 feet down to the surface. So it's quite a large step. And Neil went down and he actually held on to a tether, like a rope, and he jumped off of that last step and he landed and he said, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And some others later said, "Oh, he really said one small step for a man." But he didn't. He said one small step for man. And some of the religious community got a little bit irritated that it was kind of like it was a little too arrogant, but it was his words. And then Buzz Aldrin, after about an hour, got suited up and he came down the ladder. But before he closed this hatch, he made very sure that it would not lock behind him. He purposely did not close the door, close the hatch. They shut off the air system, and they knew that if they closed the door, the air system would kick on and it would pressurize the spacecraft, and they might not get the door open again. So that was really vital. And then both astronauts were on the moon surface. And you can see this is Buzz Aldrin. He didn't have a camera. Neil had the camera. And they put up a Sears flag that was purchased in a Houston Sears by a NASA secretary that had wire in it to keep it look like it was flagging. And here is one of the astronauts collecting the science experiments. And Neil Armstrong said, "Isn't that view magnificent?" And Buzz Aldrin said, "Magnificent desolation." But Neil said, "No, it reminds me of the deserts of the Southwest." And it was 200 degrees in the sun. Here's Buzz. And you can see the footprints they left behind. This would be Neil with the camera. I don't know who took the photo, but you can see the Earth up right there, the blue Earth. That always inspired the astronauts when they saw that. And there's one of the first footprints on the moon. It'll be there for about 1,000,000 years. They had 3 science experiments to set up, not very many, and the whole event was well scripted because they were very cautious. They didn't want to have anything go wrong. But they set up a solar measuring device, the solar wind, and a lunar seismometer, and then they also set up a reflector that would reflect a laser beam from the Earth to measure the distance to the moon. And they had a contingency plan. Right away, Neil had to pick up some collection of samples in case they had to hurry up and get out. They didn't know what the lunar surface might be like. There might be holes. There might be quicksand. They just didn't know. It was so new. And the cooling packs that they had on, they had like water running through them to cool them down, were untested on the moon, so they didn't know how they would work, but they worked pretty good. And they had enough water to keep them cool and give them protection. So maybe someday this will be a camping visiting site to see where the lunar mission first was. And the lunar regolith is rather soft and rather like wood stove ash. And you can see how deep Buzz sunk in. And then Neil actually did a no-no. He split from the guided tour that he was supposed to be on, which Mission Control had control of. And he went to that crater and he looked to see if there was a ledge in the stratum, and there was. And he was really intrigued by that. And then finally, they got ready to lift off. And this is the ascent stage. But they were concerned about that switch that was damaged. And Buzz Aldrin came up with using a felt pen to jam the switch so it was stuck open. And the rocket fired, and Buzz said it was the smoothest ride from the lunar surface back up to the command module. And this is the side that they would dock the lunar module on, the command module. Not on the bottom side, that's the heat shield. But this is where they could gain access to go into the command module. Then it took 3 days. Well, actually, it was a little bit faster. It was under 3 days to get back from the moon. And they entered the Earth's atmosphere at 24,000 miles per hour, but slowed down enough that the 5,000 degrees temperature of the heat shield held up, and they splashed down south of Hawaii in the Pacific. And they collected the command module, which was named Columbia. Now you might wonder what happened to the Eagle, the lunar lander. They intended for it to crash onto the moon, but it appears to have gone into lunar orbit, and it's probably still in lunar orbit today. And the Apollo 14, no, it was Apollo 10 spacecraft, lunar lander, Snoopy, went into sun orbit, and every once in a while it passes the Earth. And about 10 years ago it did that. And there's some proposals to capture it, turn it into a museum in space. So the Apollo crew had to go into quarantine for 2 weeks just in case they had any pathogens they collected on the moon. So that was important that they did that. They just didn't know what would happen. They had a visit by former President Nixon, who cheered them up, and time passed pretty well, and they didn't have any pathogens. But the Apollo 11 crew collected 48 pounds of lunar samples. Now, later crews like Apollo 17 collected 210 pounds. They were more confident of what they could do. And I just want to point out to you that this is 2 millimeters, very small size. And here's a glass spheral, little glass ball, probably created when a meteor impacted the moon, and the heat was so intense it made glass out of the impact. And there's a northosite right here, which is also on the Earth. And Split Rock Lighthouse is on a rock that is made of a northosite. Here's some basalt down here. And this is an interesting one right up here. I'm trying to see how to, Egulintra. Well, I butchered that word, but it's rather intriguing. It's kind of vesicular and bubbly. So Apollo 11 Columbia Command Module is in the Smithsonian, if you want to take a look at it. And everybody who looks at it just is amazed at how small it is. It's very cozy, like a small car. So the Apollo crew went and had a ticker tape parade in New York City. And that was a great festive event. And then there were other Apollo missions, Apollo 12, 14, 15, 16 and 17. And the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has documented where they went. You can still see where the lunar rover moved. And here is some of the landing sites. Apollo 11 is in the Sea of Tranquility, and Apollo 12, Oceanus Procellarum. Apollo 14 was right in here, Fra Mauro. Apollo 15, Hadley Rill. Apollo 16, the Lunar Highlands. Apollo 17, Taurus Littrow, right in here. So they're mostly in these areas. And there is still a lot more of the moon to explore. So to this day, nobody has left the Earth-Moon orbit. Who will be the next greatest explorer? If the lights are on, you'd see that's me. But I think I might be saying, Roger, Houston, we got a problem. But where would I go? I think I would explore the Apennines, this mountain range. And it rises up to 12 to 14,000 feet. And wouldn't that be stunning to be alongside of and see that view? Well, as Carl Sagan said, we have lingered long enough on the shores of this cosmic ocean. Let us set sail for the stars. Thank you very much. Are there any questions I could try to answer? I was at my grandparents' farm in Grove City, Minnesota, and I still recall my father looking. We stepped outside, and he said, "Just imagine." He pointed at the moon, and you could see it up there. There's humans on the moon right now, and we watched, for the whole weekend the TV. And does anybody else recall the lunar landing of Apollo 11? There's one over there. You want to tell us your story? Yeah, right. And then unfortunately, by the time Apollo 17 came around, people were becoming a little bit bored. But if you watch the videos on YouTube of Apollo 17, they're really exciting. And they were excited astronauts. They were better trained than the other crews for the geology of the moon. And so it's going to be great when Artemis goes back, and it'll be a whole new adventure. Well, thank you once again, everybody.